All right, welcome to Critical Weight Theory. This is take two because I have a cold and I kind of lost my voice when I was talking a little bit ago. So keep that in mind. My voice might sound a little bit rough. It's been a really bad cold, so it's crappy. But anyway, this is my show within a show that I call Reply To, and I look at comments people have made on my YouTube videos and I respond to them. And this time, a YouTube person named Louis Samuel 9189, he commented, and I'm quoting him now. At least I assume it's a he. Obviously, I don't know for sure. But anyway, this person commented, "You argued that Obamacare doesn't force you to buy insurance because the fine for not having insurance was removed. However, what you leave out is that the fine was removed in 2017 and signed by, wait for it, President Donald J. Trump. So I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I'm trying to understand your argument. Are you saying that Obamacare is not fascist because the tax it originally had was removed? I would like to point out that Obamacare fine was removed in 2017 as passed by Congress, and it was signed by President Donald J. Trump in 2017. So the person repeated themselves right there, obviously. But anyway, the comment closes with this. Then again, maybe not you, but a lot of the left is claiming Trump is fascist, so, would those people say that Trump is a fascist by removing government power over people? I'm trying to understand your exact argument here. And that's the end of the comment. So, you know, I'm going to go over why people claim Trump is a fascist. Yeah, I'm going to get more into detail about that. And, well, first, let's start by noting that Donald Trump has actually not done anything to remove government power over people in any good way. He's removed regulations on corporations and things like that. But other than that, he has actually expanded government power over the general public. So the idea that Donald Trump is some anti-authoritarian president is laughable, and I'll get into that in a little more detail. But first, I want to say what I think of when I think of fascism, sort of image wise. I think of, the concentration camps, I think of the Holocaust, um, you know, the suppression of media, the destruction of competing political parties, and of course, somebody who's invading a lot of other countries. I think of war and warlike rhetoric, somebody who loves violence, and somebody who is obsessed with things like eugenics and who persecutes minorities, not just one group, but many different groups. That's what I think of when I think of fascism. And what I don't think of is Obamacare. All right. So it's a little bit funny. I mean, darkly funny to me that, of all the things that Republicans could compare, to fascism, that Obamacare is apparently something that they have on the list. So in the video that this person was responding to, I was addressing claims that Obamacare was fascist authoritarianism, and I was explaining why, the existence of Obamacare is not a very compelling example of authoritarianism or fascism. So, authoritarianism or fascism is not judged by one regulatory or deregulatory action, at least not realistically. It's judged by how power is used overall, attitudes toward elections, courts, press, and dissent, as well as, the persecution of minorities. And there's, of course, also a strong willingness to concentrate authority in the executive. And All those things I just listed are, of course, things that are significantly attached to the Trump regime. You know, he has used power to, like right now, he's trying to subvert elections. He's even suggested numerous times that there should not be midterm elections this year. He has tried to go after the press, his critics, and all that kind of stuff. And he's tried to get more and more power given to the president and stuff like that. So, all of that stuff is a big chunk of why we accuse Trump of being a fascist. And of course, it doesn't help him image wise when he's threatening to invade or outright invading so many other countries. Like there's the Iran war going on right now. Now that was technically that wasn't happening when this person made this comment on YouTube, but it was something a person might have predicted Trump would do because he is reckless and he is somebody who likes war, he likes violence, and he's threatening to invade Canada, take over Greenland, and threatening to invade Mexico as well. This is somebody who is unhinged, and that's one of the reasons why he is considered fascistic. The constant threats to invade people that obviously other presidents have not really threatened. Like, you can accuse, Obama or Joe Biden of a lot of different things, but at no point did they say, "Hey, let's threaten to invade Canada." There was no talk of invading Greenland that I can recall during Joe Biden's term or Obama's term. So that's why we are more easily saying that Trump is more overtly authoritarian and fascistic. So even historically authoritarian leaders have occasionally reduced or eliminated specific regulations. That doesn't by itself define their governing style. So, no serious person argues that Trump is fascist just because he removed the ACA penalty. That would be rather incoherent. It's more relevant that the ACA tax penalty was, in itself, not particularly fascistic. It was a tax penalty. One might not be a fan of taxes, but tax penalties by themselves are not enough to make a country overtly fascist. Okay? So that's like the most simple point here, and I think it withstands scrutiny because guess what? All countries seem to have taxes of some type. And as I've explained in numerous videos, there's a bit of an irony here because right wingers are not typically actually anti tax. They just believe in shifting the tax burden away from the rich and more onto the poor. That's one of the reasons I'm not a conservative or a right winger or a Republican or whatever. In fact, here's an interesting perspective that you won't hear from a lot of people, but ironically, I am someone who genuinely had high school political a high school political awakening that was aligned with some anarchic sentiments. Back when I was a younger lad, that was sort of my first political leaning was more in an anarchist type of direction. So, with that background, I am ironically actually more interested in potentially abolishing taxes than the average Republican out there. If we could make it work, I mean, that's an important thing that you have to add there. I'm also open to discussing the abolition of money in general because I'm not some moronic chicken shit who's afraid of, like, oh, these scary ideas. I think it's often good to question the world around us, even the common everyday things like money or taxes and, how our institutions function. Now, a person might reach some iffy conclusions while questioning the status quo, of course, But that happens under conformist thinking all the time anyway, and that doesn't stop conformists from conforming. So the vague risk of possible rotten outcomes from questioning the status quo should not mean that we never question the status quo. You know, you just question it a little bit more carefully, a little bit more wisely, and I guess use some common sense here and there. So the implication of that person's comment was that, oh, Wade is too scared to question Obamacare. He's wanting to wanting to have people in the grip of the wicked Obamacare and all that kind of stuff. But no, that's not really what it is. I'm just simply pointing out that a tax penalty by itself is not particularly fascist, all right? So, the real mistake in the right wing framing regarding Obamacare is significant. And when it comes to this particular topic regarding the tax penalty, the argument assumes sort of a false binary. If a law ever had a coercive element, it must forever be described as coercive, even after that element is removed. In this case, the tax penalty was removed, yet they still treat Obamacare like it's the biggest boogeyman or something like that, which is laughable. Like, you can actually say Obamacare was pretty well defanged. So if the tax penalty was fascistic, well, it's not there anymore. So you can kind of stop shivering under the covers. The Obamacare tax penalty monster is no longer under your bed. You can, you know, go out now and enjoy the world, enjoy the freedom that you have or whatever. So, like let's look at it differently. You wouldn't say that alcohol prohibition still exists because it existed in 1925, and therefore we have to view the world as if alcohol prohibition still exists. The draft, you wouldn't say that the draft still exists because it existed during Vietnam. Well, then again, it's possible that the draft will be reinstated, but it doesn't technically exist as of my recording this video. There's still the selective service that you're supposed to sign up for, but technically the draft is not active right now. And you would say the same thing about, you know, Obamacare's tax penalty. It's not active currently. And laws are judged by their current legal effect, not as much by their original form. So, like, we don't look at alcohol solely through the lens of prohibition right now. So, a fair summary would be yes, the ACA originally included a coercive tax penalty. Yes, that penalty was eliminated by Republicans and signed by Trump. And as a result, the ACA no longer forces individuals to buy insurance. Whether the ACA is good or bad policy is sort of a separate question, and whether Trump is authoritarian has very little to do with this single change. That's the argument, no gymnastics required here. And, again, I do want to emphasize that the Obamacare tax penalty was not in itself particularly fascistic or authoritarian anyway. It was a burden, it was a nuisance, but most people would have actually survived it. And I don't think the existence of a tax penalty itself makes a government, the most authoritarian or fascistic government that ever existed on the planet or anything like that. Now let's look at the bigger, more general reasons that a person might label Trump or somebody like Trump a fascist. So you have the cult of leadership and nationalism. You have extreme nationalism, often centered on a single, infallible leader who claims to represent the nation's will. So, who does that sound like? Somebody with goofy hair and an orangish face by some chance? I don't know. I don't know. You tell me. What about fabricating reality and sort of a climate of constant fear? He's creating a dramatic us versus them narrative through propaganda and technology, including AI, often fabricating threats to maintain control and silence opposition. And that includes, when you consider fabricating threats, that means the idea that the 2020 election was stolen. That's been disproven about a zillion times already. And then you have other little threats like, or imagined threats like, oh, those Haitians are eating cats and dogs in Minnesota. So, something's got to be done about that. So, that was a ridiculous thing that he said about immigrants in that presidential debate, and it should have been completely disqualifying. It's incredibly embarrassing that this country still elected this clown after saying that statement. That that moment alone, that moment alone should have been enough to disqualify him from becoming president in the eyes of the public. But the public, what can you say? A lot of them are really stupid. You know, it's a fact. Some people would be after me. They would be dragging me for calling the American people stupid, but it's just undeniable at this point. If you vote for somebody who said something like that in the debate, you're stupid. It's just true. It's something I shouldn't apologize for saying. It's something they should apologize for being, okay? So get smarter out there. Stop being fucking dumb, Americans. Okay? You're making me lose my voice even more now. All right, so let's talk about authoritarianism and militarism. Also, obvious highlights of the fascist movement. And of course, you can find those sorts of tendencies in governments throughout the world. That's why it's easier to call militaristic societies kind of fascistic, even though there might be some technical distinctions you can make. It's still understandable why somebody would say that, North Korea's leader is, a fascist like leader. Like, it still makes sense. Like, even though not all of the elements might line up perfectly, but the militarism aspect is definitely pretty fascistic. The glorification of military power, suppression of democratic dissent, and the state overriding individual rights, those are all components of authoritarianism and fascism. So, what about the revival of nativism or the use of narrow historical definitions of identity, promoting ethnocentrism, and all that kind of stuff? Well, that also describes a lot of these MAGA people, of course. That's like one of their main things. It's one of the things that their movement will hinge on. And, that's a certain element of fascism as well. There's contempt for liberal democracy, open disdain for parliamentary politics. They'd rather have the strong national leader making the decisions. They don't like individual liberties, and they don't like competing political parties. And here's a big one: the targeting of minorities. Now, I got into that topic a little bit already, but when it comes to MAGA and all that crap, there is a consistent emphasis on superiority, creating hierarchies that scapegoat minorities like immigrants, non white people, in some ways, women as well, promoting masculinity, like the tough guy as the ultimate ideal, all that kind of stuff. Like, even when it comes to, women in Trump's orbit, like Christy Nome was bragging about shooting a puppy and stuff like that. So, like, these macho tough guy kind of images will even be there among the ladies in the group. It's like, uh, they're just so embarrassing. Like all this, when it comes to all these macho tough guys, we can all be guilty of that a little bit. Like we all have our stories about like when we were macho at this point, or that like we'll cite a moment where we seemed like a badass maybe. Like okay, I'll even give my own example. Like I sometimes talk about all the times where I've walked through blizzards and stuff like that, which I've done regularly throughout my life. And I'm not gonna say it makes me a weak person, but it's kind of embarrassing. Like if I wanted to make myself seem like, oh, I'm a tough guy, like I'm really the toughest of the tough because I've walked through a snowstorm or something like that. Like it becomes embarrassing. And also, like, you lose badass points if you brag about being a badass. Like a lot of people, I don't think they've gotten that memo, but that's for other people to determine about you. They're supposed to call you a badass. You're not supposed to say that about yourself. You actually lose badass points if you say that about yourself. All right? So that's what's so embarrassing about Trump constantly bragging about himself. You know, Other people are supposed to brag about you. You're not supposed to do that so much about yourself. That means you're self aggrandizing, means you're a stupid asshole. All right? So I think more people need to get that memo. It's a very important one. Like I said, we can all be guilty of bragging about something, and it can be embarrassing. So we should all reel it in a little bit when it comes to that. And if you're one of those macho a-holes, is like constantly trying to pick fights and like, oh, I've got big muscles, I'm real tough, I can beat you up. Like, go be tough somewhere else, you fucking asshole. I'm sick of people like that already. Go be a tough guy over there, away from me. I'm just trying to have a normal day. You know, I'm so sick of these morons. And get out of our lives, get out of our system. You know, Sorry to leave on such a hostile note, but I'm just so sick of idiots. All right, have a good day.